Hello, BookTube. I'm here with an author today. The author is Janet Wertman. This is her forthcoming new book, The Boy King, the third and final book in a trilogy of Tudor-era historical novels that she's been writing that I've been praising since they started coming out. And I thought we'd have a nice chat about all things Tudors. So welcome to the channel.
I'm thrilled to be here.
My listeners have to put up with more than is healthy of me droning on about historical subjects. So I thought, as a change of pace, you could tell us a little about the historical premise of this book. Who is this boy king? My more historically inclined readers are already going to be able to tell at least a little bit, because he has the Tudor red hair and the Tudor bulging eyes, the Tudor menacing mouth. He's got the physiognomy down pat. But nevertheless, could you tell us a little about the historical setting here and who the pivotal main character is?
This was the son that Henry VIII moved heaven and earth to get. So this was the kid. Henry VIII had been married to Catherine of Aragon for 20 years. She didn't have a son. He left her for Anne Boleyn, didn't have a son, and he executed Anne Boleyn for Jane Seymour, and Jane gave him his son. But he tried for a really long time to get it, was a little bit older when he finally had him, gained about 400 pounds, and didn't really live long enough to make sure that his son would come to the throne mature or old enough. So this little boy came to the throne at age 9, very earnest, really understood the great mantle of responsibility that had been draped around his shoulders, and really desperately wanted to fulfill it and do the right thing. Tragic little boy. Spoiler alert. It's historical fiction. How spoiler can you get?
I know. I'm pretty sure that my viewers are aware that he's dead. But we can go into the details.
Right.
Especially since this is the third volume. And
yeah.
You have been dealing with the Seymours.
Yeah.
2 and now a third book. Because as you say, he was a boy when he became king. That means a council. That means regents.
Yeah.
So you had to delve into the politics of this world. You had to delve into the Seymour brothers. And
so much politics. This book was actually a little bit less politics than The Path to Somerset, just by the nature of how much, because everything is filtered through a 9-year-old's head. Right. So all of the politics were distilled down, and you really just had to let the events speak for themselves. So yes, but a lot of politics.
The Path to Somerset being the second book?
Yes.
Jane the Queen, just so we keep everybody on the same page. The first book was Jane the Queen, then The Path to Somerset, and now The Boy King, which is, you make a split narrative decision here. You give a lot of narrative real estate to Edward, to this boy. But you also give a lot of narrative real estate to his sister, to Mary.
Yes.
Because although Henry and Catherine of Aragon didn't have a son, they did have a daughter.
They did have a daughter.
And I'm curious about, you talk about a lot of politics. That's a lot of research. And you can't do a lot of research about the woman who would go on to become Bloody Mary without hitting a lot of very partisan writing. But your Princess Mary is thoroughly human, thoroughly three-dimensional. Not.
Thank you.
The Princess Mary in this book, you would have to be a very sanguine reader to imagine her burning anyone alive. And I'm curious, you had to know that Mary was out there. How did you write this Mary? You don't have to worry about that with Edward, right? Because there's no future Edward. No, spoilers again.
It's not that much of a jump. So, okay, so I'm going to, and I don't have to worry about it because this is a spoiler for my next book, like after this one, after she comes to the throne. So, but people will forget by the time we get there.
You're going to stick with the Tudors.
But yes, but for a little while anyway. But so Mary comes to the throne, And she gets married to Philip of Spain. The entire country hates her choice of husband. She falls pregnant, or believes that she is pregnant, and the child is not coming, and her stomach is starting to deflate. And what's going on? This is God angry with her for not taking this. So Mary believed that she came to the throne, that God brought her to the throne. God saved her through the boy king, and that I have there, brought her to the throne to bring the country back to Catholicism. She wasn't doing that. God was not letting her son be born. That's when Mary started to burn heretics, is when she was pregnant, waiting for the child that never came because it was a phantom pregnancy. So that's the Mary who started all of that. And I think she's consistent with the way I've portrayed her in the book.
So in the course of your research, with what we could safely call a dysfunctional family, what sense did you have of the relationships between three of the most famous siblings in history, Edward, Mary, and Elizabeth? What was your sense of their relationship with each other? Were they kept so far away from each other that they could only relate to each other in terms of power and self-preservation? You have a scene in this book where Mary assures Edward that she loves him, and it feels like it comes from a personal place.
It was, so everything changed when Edward became king. Before then, everything was Catholic. So Mary and Elizabeth were surprisingly close after Anne Boleyn was executed, because Mary felt really bad for Elizabeth. That's almost the more surprising one. Mary also took care of Edward after he was born. And then when Henry's final wife, Catherine Parr, came into the picture, she really created a wonderful family, just like a little hearth for all three of the kids. She brought Mary back to court and gave her all of the precedence and the honors that Henry's fifth wife tried to deny her, because, but Henry's fifth wife was a little bit younger than his oldest daughter, and they didn't get along at all. Catherine Parr comes along, and she was married to Henry for like 5 or 6 years and created a wonderful type of family, brought Edward to court, brought Elizabeth to court, brought Mary to court, and everyone really, it was a beautiful family for a little while. Then Edward comes to the throne, and he's got this very different idea in terms of religion than Mary did. And that was also a Catherine Parr thing, because she was a big reformist. And in the Tudor age, a boy was taken from the women and started his education at 6 years old. And that happened after Catherine Parr and Henry had been married for about 6 months. So Catherine said, "Oh, you know, here are all these wonderful tutors. You know, they're brilliant in Greek and all of the subjects. These should be the people who teach your son." And Henry agreed, and they were all very, very reformist. And so he grew up ready to take the country way further in that direction.
And in the course of this book, it's not, of course, I mean, the Tudors are the mega stars. They are the name recognition people. But you're dealing with another family, too. You're dealing with the Seymour brothers.
Yeah.
And you have to deal with, I mean, the second book, obviously the title alone says that you had to spend a lot of time with these guys. What did you make of them? I mean, especially, it seems almost that there's a change of heart towards a popularism, a kind of popularism on the part of one brother.
It is. I think they're the most fascinating family. I think they're the central dynasty in the Tudor era. They were there for everything. I mean, every time you turn around, there's another Seymour in the picture.
Creeping around the staircase.
You know, you really couldn't get away from it. And this one, Tom Seymour has never been my favorite. And this is where he really just kind of went off the rails. In this book.
So this requires, obviously, any Tudor fiction requires a prodigious amount of research. Did you find the ideas, some of the conceptions that you may have gone into it with, Did you find any of those conceptions changing the more you did your research? Like, for instance, Edward wrote his own little book. Do you see any of him coming out in that book? Did any of it change what you'd gone in thinking?
No, interestingly enough, I had always read Edward's diary slightly different from a lot of people. So everyone looks at the diary and, spoiler, sorry, and they decide that this poor boy was this heartless monster because I'm so sorry, my video just keeps splits. Anyway, they decided that Edward was this heartless monster because of the diary entry where he just writes this one little sentence, that the Duke of Somerset had his head cut off on Tower Hill at 9 o'clock this morning. And that is this intense, like, yeah, that's a little monster. And I always saw just so much emotion behind that. I mean, this was a boy. And, you know, this was a boy and he was trying really hard. I see enormous amount of emotion behind that. And I see emotion behind a lot of the other entries that people don't see. And I include a bunch of them in there just for funsies.
But you also, in the course of this book, subtly alter the attention that Edward pays to ruling. You have him a little bit more involved.
I do.
The mechanics of Tudor governing. Why was that? Do you think that was dramatic? Was that dramatically necessary?
I put him, I had people reporting to him probably more than they did, and I put him in some council meetings early, basically because otherwise the entire book would have been somebody coming into his room going, this is what we did. And so, now there were a few times where I knew he would not have been in the room, and so I had him listening. You know, he heard like underneath the doorway, or another time, you know, that the really salacious stuff with Tom Seymour and Elizabeth, I had him hiding behind the tapestries, which as a boy he must have done. Come on. So but I did have them, I only did it a tiny bit, because as soon as Northumberland came into the picture, Northumberland really pretended that Edward was ruling much more than he was. And so that's when Edward did start to sign all the stuff, and he started to talk in the council meetings because Northumberland would prep him the night before. So that was all true. It was only during Somerset's rule that I needed to put him into more situations. I tried to do it sparingly, but I did push him.
You make him just a bit wise beyond his years, just a bit preternatural, in a way that I think is natural for the Tudors. They sometimes come off that way. They come off like they were almost born conniving or perceptive, more perceptive than the people around them. I like that in all the scenes that with the slightly older Edward. He's right there at the heart of the matter as fast as anyone in the room. And you always get, I mean, the first-hand accounts of young Elizabeth are exactly that. People just stunned that this is still technically a child, even though she seems as aware as anybody of what's going on. Well, what must that have been like? That is the ultimate challenge for Tudor novelists, to deal with this freakish family.
Everyone said that he was mature beyond his years. And Elizabeth, I mean, we know from the history that Elizabeth was 3 years old, and when her mom was executed, and she looked at the person who was telling her, and she's like, yesterday you called me my lady princess, and today you called me my lady Elizabeth. What's that about? So she knew at the age of 3 what this was. And I have these 2 letters that Henry Fitzroy, Henry's bastard child, had written his father, one when he was 6 and one when he was 7. And the growth from 6 to 7 was enormous, and you would have thought that he was at least 15 when he was 7. So there was an incredible maturity, and people were I don't know. I've got to believe people were more mature back then. They were expected to be adult much earlier back then.
In the circles you're writing about, it would be literally life and death.
Yeah, right.
uh, can I get you to do a little bit of speculation? Of course, every historian in the world, every Tudor historian in the world speculates on what Edward would have been like had he reached adulthood. Had he been a king at 25 and then 35? Quite a few of those Tudor historians think, from what they see, probably from that one line in the diary that you mentioned, they think, talk about Bloody Mary, this would have been Bloody Eddie to a huge degree, that he would have been a massive persecutor of his own people. It'd be speculation, of course, but I've got you here, and you're a Tudor novelist, so.
He had the potential to really out crazy his father, which is not easy to do. But there's one scene where, and this was reported as true. One of the ambassadors reported it, and so of course I had to put it in, where he literally had a bird that he was sitting there, and he wanted to stress to his counselors, just how important this was, and he just started plucking the feathers out of this dead bird and like pulled an arm off or a wing off the dead bird and said, I'm going to get you. This could be you. I mean, that's pure crazy Henry. So yeah,
Well, as long as we're on the subject of speculation,
okay.
There's of course the bugaboo subject with Edward. You have to weigh in on it if you write about him, and that is, why did he die? You've read, I'm sure you've read all of the accounts of people, some people weighing in that it was poison, some that it was a congenital defect, tuberculosis, plague, syphilis even, I've heard mentioned by some authors. Do you have a favorite?
I say congenital, just because Henry's older brother Arthur dead at 16 from lung issues. Henry's bastard son, Henry Fitzroy, dead at 16 from lung issues. Henry's real son, dead at 16 from lung issues. That has got to be somewhere in there. The poison piece was, they said that Northumberland gave him arsenic to keep him alive.
Famously immortalized in Jane of Thousand Days.
Right, and I couldn't figure out how to put that in. Because it's from his point of view, so I couldn't, there was no way to sneak in that little bit. I did try. But that was why people thought he was poisoned, because he was actually being poisoned, but it was just to preserve him for as long as Northumberland needed to then go ahead and get Jane Grey on the throne. And
in the course, I mean, look at the intricacies even of narrating the thumbnail version of that. I have to ask how tempted you were. How much did you leave out? Because the more you dig into this stuff, the more personalities and side stories you find, which is why Tudor novels tend to be immense. And I'm wondering, did you face those temptations to just...
It was so much. Oh my goodness.
So much.
I could have done an entire trilogy just with this one. The whole sequence with Tom Seymour could have... I could have spread that out with Edward Seymour. That could have been absolutely huge. I mean, the whole thing could have been huge, and I just kept on finding myself going, no, can't do it. No, can't do it.
Now, what about this? You're an author. You're writing Tudor era historical novels. There's another author out there writing Tudor era historical novels. Perhaps you've heard of her, and I'm wondering. Do you ever feel like glancing over your shoulder? Do you ever feel like, Wolf Hall is the name of the family seat of the family you're writing about. It's the same people. Is there any of that? Is there any of that, the other person who's in the room is the most famous historical novelist in the world writing on exactly the same subject matter? Does that prey on you? It's a priceless opportunity to ask an author that.
Okay, the time that it really preyed on me was when I was getting ready to release Jane the Queen, because Jane the Queen was going to be the time period of her third novel. And I was just terrified that she was going to be releasing it at around the same time I was, because then there would have been that natural comparison. But then I got Jane out in 2016, and now The Boy King is way later than what she's writing about. So I'm totally fine.
I have to ask too. It's more a procedural question, but it's fascinated me since I read Jane the Queen, because a point that I want, it's a little awkward to make the point to my viewers with you right there in the room, so to speak, but these books are terrific. They're absolutely terrific. I'm not talking just about the research or about the palpable feeling of the time. I'm talking about just electric characters being driven by dialogue. And now that I'm over with the embarrassing part, in light of that fact, I'm curious to know why you went the publishing route that you did to self-publish these, when these are better than 95% of the Tudor fiction that's been written in the last 20 years. It's not like this. The typical unfavorable view of self-publishing is that it's fiction that can't hack it, I guess is a brutal way to put it. And this stuff's brilliant. So what was the decision on your part to do that?
So I tried to write Jane the Queen for, it was like 20 years.
Really?
Well, it started out as the story of Anne Boleyn. It was originally The Secret Diary of Anne Boleyn, and it was brilliant. It was a dual timeline, and Elizabeth was reading the diary, and everything was going to be like perfectly timed out for the lessons that she needed to learn. And I got 150 pages in after, I started taking it seriously, and I was 150 pages in, and I was looking up a minor point, and I saw on Amazon that this other author had just published The Secret Diary of Anne Boleyn, dual timeline, Elizabeth Whitney. And so, okay, I can't do Anne Boleyn, I'll just do Jane Seymour. And that got me out of my immediate depression. But it took me a little while. It was when I decided to view the entire Seymour family and to do the trilogy that I was really just able to press on and go ahead. And by that point, by the time I finished Jane, I had been working on it so let me back up. I had gotten to where I thought I was done. I was so incredibly proud of it. And I sent it off to a developmental editor. And in the back of my mind, I was thinking, oh, she's just going to say, this is perfect. Just go ahead now. And she didn't. But so I sent it off to her because I sent it to a couple of agents and no real interest. But the editor basically told me that I had to totally rewrite it. Because what I had done was I paid attention to the objective story. And so I had given, I had 12 points of view in the book, because every scene was written from the point of view with the person who had most at stake in that scene. So 12 points of view. I had no character arc. I had no real story, but what actually happened was very clear. And she said, no, the only thing that ever matters when you're writing is what that character feels and experiences, and everything has to be through that. And that changed everything. And I completely rewrote it and got into critique groups and this. And by that point, I was just exhausted. I was done. And the idea of, I felt finished. The book was done and I was happy with it. And to start the process of finding an agent and finding a publisher and having to...
You would attack the marathon to a marathon.
After I had thought about it before, I just said, no, let me see what happens if I just come out with it. And then it worked. And now I'm like sitting here going, I would love 500,000 people to read it. A bit late for that.
But there's always the future, right? You're a
That's true.
dad now.
That's
And
true.
with 3 terrific novels out there. Although I should point out for my viewers that this book is not out yet, right? This comes out at the end of the month.
September 30th.
September
Yes.
30th. So
Yes.
you can all pre-order. And in the
Yes.
meantime, there's nothing to stop you from ordering Jane the Queen.
Some people have gotten in touch with me to tell me, oh, I'm rereading Jane and Somerset again, getting ready for this one. That was fun.
That. It's extremely pleasant to do, so it's not a chore. But you mentioned, did you mention that you're thinking about sticking with the Tudors?
Yes, I am going on through Elizabeth, and then maybe circling back to the earlier days, kind of like the Star Wars version of.
The process that you describe, oh my, I've heard that from so many self-published authors that, look, I went through the rings of purgatory to get this thing to the state that it's in now. The last thing I want to do is a cross-country trek to beg and plead for the traditional publishing industry to maybe come back and tell me do it all over again, rewrite it all for it's not Hollywood enough, or it doesn't fit my status or anything like that. I've heard so many self-published authors say a version of that. But I'm curious to know, that marathon is now over for you. For a new Tudor book, might you consider courting that 35 million per person audience? Is the one thing you lack with self-publishing, is the traditional publisher's massive publicity arm. It's the one thing that you don't have. I'm not sure. Most self-published authors that I talk to don't seem to miss it. You've had obviously a very good response to these books.
I've had a good response. I don't know. There is. I am a bit of a control freak. So I like being able to say this is how I want to do it. I mean, so I don't know actually that a traditional publisher would have been as interested in the Seymour family. So there's like this huge Team Anne out there. And back in 2016, nobody really liked Jane all that much. And it was a much harder sell. People don't like Edward Seymour. So the idea that I was going to write The Path to Somerset from his point of view, it's like, oh, he's horrible, no. And it's like, no, Edward's great, Edward's great. And now the boy king.
With me. I went into it thinking he was a slimy toad. And I came out of it thinking completely different. So.
Completely different. And now that nobody has written a novel from or that's involved Edward Tudor since Mark Twain's The Prince and the Pauper. There are no novels. So nothing is out there. So I really think that a traditional publisher might not have appreciated it. And my next trilogy is going to involve Elizabeth, and I kind of feel like a traditional publisher is going to look at me going, everybody's done her. So I'm kind of outside the traditional lines for traditional publishing. So this is my choice.
Also, I think it would be inhospitable for a control freak.
Right.
With self-publishing, you get to make all the calls. That's the headache, but it's also the glory of it all, is that all the calls are yours. I think that's fascinating. So to wrap up for now, I'd like to know, I mean, the book comes out at the end of September. You can all pre-order your copy, but what would be, I don't know quite how to phrase it. What is the takeaway of this third book? It seems like in addition to all the drama, all the different people, all the great parade of personalities in these novels, for each book, there's also a kind of cause, almost a takeaway. First about Jane, and then about the Seymour brothers, one in particular, and now about this boy king. Is the takeaway that he was an incredibly sympathetic figure for this book? Or maybe an underestimated figure?
Yes.
It's shadowy in history. I mean, we have that diary, but he seems a bit remote in a way that his sisters do not. And I'm wondering, was it sort of that gist of the book on your part to make him less remote?
I wanted to bring him to the forefront, and to just. he was betrayed. That really is this. I mean, over and over, he was betrayed by one uncle, by a second uncle, by everyone around him, and then finally by his own body. And he just, like, the whole Seymour family, it almost. So years ago, James Clavell's Shogun, there's this line that the poem, I think it's like Yabu's death poem, where he just said, you know, it was just a dream within a dream. And that almost feels like what the entire Seymour family was. It was a dream within a dream. So this dynasty rose up with Jane, continued through, and then just, it was gone. And you know, my Jane the Queen opens. The prologue has Mary in the prologue and has Mary in the epilogue to The Boy King. It is really, they showed up, they changed history for a little while, and then they left.
Wow.
And it was just, they faded away. So.
Well,
A bit of a tragic and twisted view.
there you have it. That doesn't sell this book. I don't know what will. Well, thank you very much for making the time to talk to me. That is wonderful. And once again, I want to stress, the book comes out at the end of the month. Pre-order a copy. It's well worth your time. And there's nothing to stop you from ordering and reading the first 2 books in this trilogy, because they're fantastic. But when the next time you have a book out, let's get together and talk about it.
You got your copy before like half my relatives.
Well, good. Well, anyway, I'm gonna wrap this up and see if I can wake up my schnauzer. so I will talk to you soon.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.